How is everybody doing? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're doing well. Continuing to learn, grow, get through your tests, and get on to your ministry. The goal of every Christian, according to the commands of the Bible. Today, I want to address something that I've talked about tangentially, in other words, on the sidelines, if you will, pretty much throughout the entirety of this channel. I've mentioned the term specifically. Now, I want to get into more direct information that we have from the Bible to describe this particular trend that is still, unfortunately, alive and well today. I'm talking about Gnosticism, the supposed worship, if you will, of secret knowledge that was used by false teachers in the early days of the church, specifically with the intent by Satan to sneak into these congregations, infiltrate them, as the Bible calls it, introduce secret, destructive heresies, doctrines, nonsense, things that, Peter, Paul, James, Jude, John, basically every writer of the New Testament had to address at some point or another, because this particular trend, although it had different flavors in different locations, was very much attacking the church in general. We see some of the most pertinent and direct acknowledgement and disabusing, if you will, or correcting or reproving of these false notions by the Apostle Paul, Peter, and Jude. But again, every single writer had their chance to address these issues because they were all dealing with it at one point or another. I'm going to read you guys a little bit of the historical background based on the writings of Dr. Bill Luganbill here, off of ichthus.com, specifically in the Peter series. I believe it's study 41 or 42. It's basically a primer on false teaching, but this bit of information here is, in my opinion, absolutely indispensable, especially when we understand just how those incipient or beginning trends back in that day have very much bled into our own, and they're still very much alive and well and kicking. So let's read real quick. Gnosticism has a long and convoluted history. It is important to recognize the later works on the subject by the Church Fathers and also some Gnostic writings which have survived. We have that in the form of the Gnostic Gospels. This can be misleading, looking into these sources, both because of the centuries-long gap in time between them and the New Testament, and also because of the diverse nature of these later witnesses. Gnosticism had many flavors, so to pinpoint any one specific writer dealing with any certain set of issues in their lap weren't necessarily the same as they were everywhere else, but the basic premise is the same. For that reason, the Gnosticism with which the apostles and their associates were having to deal with, is often termed incipient or beginner phase Gnosticism. Our direct evidence for the early Gnostics who were infiltrating the churches at this time, while informed by the later material, comes mostly from the New Testament itself. And if we're being completely honest, the place where we get the most undiluted, pure form is always going to be the Bible. Looking to any other writing outside of the Bible to back up the Bible is, in my opinion, a fool's errand. We are very much in our era guilty of this for certain. And you guys know what I'm talking about. Look at all the books on the preacher of rapture and so on. What we can say about this movement is that it was a combination of religion and philosophy, the study of ideas essentially, and that incorporated, built in, both Gentile and Jewish speculations or guessing. Akin or likened to the excesses of the so-called charismatic movement troubling the church visible today, the experiences people, quote, enjoyed were the real motive force behind this movement rather than its theoretical underpinnings. In other words, the ideas behind it had nothing to do with it. It was how much it was enjoyable for these people. To develop that analogy or likeness a bit, if a person spent a good deal of time in the library attempting to understand modern-day charismatics through attention to their so-called or on-the-surface theology, he or she would miss the point entirely. The charismatic movement is popular because many find it exciting to speak in tongues, prophecy, engage in healing, exorcise demons, for example. These are things they think they're doing, they're not actually doing it. Trying to understand that through investigating their theology is wrong-headed, both because it is the emotional thrill provided by these heretical activities that is actually the grounds or the reason for that movement's success, and also because there is in fact no legitimate theological underpinnings whatsoever. The Bible does not back up any of these claims. Just as with Gnosticism, all of these activities are biblically unfounded. We can get into that discussion about where that's stated, but the Bible very clearly says that once it's complete, we need nothing else. All we need is the Bible. Similarly, first century Gnosticism was comprised or made up of a loose set of doctrines, teachings, being taught by a very disparate or differing group of both Gentile and Jewish practitioners. So there wasn't just one select crew handing this out. It may be the case that the Jewish Gnostics focused upon the mystical interpretations of the law, while the Gentiles applied themselves more to pagan philosophy, but Gnosticism was nothing if not highly eclectic, coming from many different sources, in other words. And all of these individuals seem to have had no trouble adopting and incorporating any and all, quote, truth, which allowed them to persuade their contemporaries, the people alive at their time, to become their dedicated followers. Whatever you want me to tell you, I'll tell you, just so long as you pay me and follow. Anything that lent itself to the excesses, which in turn served as the bait to lure others into the trap, was welcome, just as in the case of comparable modern-day cult movements. And we're going to talk about how that applies today, because it's very clearly using the same script as the Gnostics did today. I'm talking about all false religions, and unfortunately even including some that actually have Christians in them. Paul warned about the danger of being deceived by these charlatans and their false teaching. Here's Colossians 2:8. Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ. And he's going to address what he's talking about. The main difference Paul draws here when speaking of these issues here is between philosophy, specifically from the beginning Gnosticism trend, incipient Gnosticism, and legalism, the traditions of men, the following of a pre-made, man-made set of rules that if we follow these things, we're not sinning, and anybody who doesn't follow me along is worse than me, and that prideful nonsense that legalism can stimulate, where people actually think they're earning salvation. That's what he's talking about. The latter more obviously than the former. In other words, they were focusing more on mysticism than the law, but it still was a thing. But the two are distinct enough to differentiate. We can tell the difference between the two. Here, while Paul is speaking mostly of the former, specifically the Jewish mysticism, it is clear, when one considers all of his comments on this subject, that Gnosticism too was rooted in Jewish traditions as applied or misapplied to natural phenomena, in the passage above, the elemental principles, for example. 1 Timothy 6:20-21, O Timothy, guard what was committed to your trust, what you were put in charge of, avoiding the profane and idle babblings and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge. The word there in the Greek, by the way, is literally gnosis. So he was calling out Gnosticism directly. By professing it, some have strayed concerning the faith. And so Gnosticism straddled, in other words, rode both the Jewish and pagan false teachings, as if they were somehow able to be combined. Again, whatever they could sell you. A factor which contributed, added to, the broadening of its appeal, with each group being initiated thereby into secrets which were generally the province of the other group. So in other words, they didn't care if they had very, very differing views of what their so-called theology was, just so long as it involved exciting, emotional experiences that didn't necessarily include Jesus Christ. And if it did, if the words Jesus Christ were there, he was either just a man, just God, or an angel, but it was always something different from what the gospel actually said. He's God, he's man, his death saves you, right? It was a very dangerous mix of lies which could lead to apostasy, straying from the faith, as in the passage we just read. Imagine astrology, angel numbers, exorcism-based spiritual warfare, mysticism, justified licentiousness, or fleshliness, sinfulness, in other words, for any manner of debauched behavior, evil behavior, since matter was deemed evil and illusory, it's all an illusion, so that it was unimportant to the enlightened. As long as you were aware of these secrets, you could engage in sin all you wanted and it wouldn't matter. This was all wrapped up in a supposedly biblical and spiritual cover. And you will see Gnosticism's appeal to unbelievers and to those who were following Christ carelessly and lackadaisically or lazily. The appearance of learned teachers of the law and professors of secular philosophy on the doorsteps of these early churches, heralding or announcing mysterious revelations which were, quote, from God, so they said, and which promised an end to the strictures, strict requirements, and restrictions of true biblical Christianity, along with deliverance from the boredom of mere Bible study, had enough of an immediate impact to prompt Jude, in this particular case, to write this emergency epistle. We're talking about Jude 1:3-11, by the way. Some of the most direct, it's like a primer on how to see what was really going on. It was the most clear information at the time. And it turns out that Jude and Paul both wrote 10 to 15 years before even Peter did. So each one of them were dealing with the exact same thing at different points in time, still going on today. And also enough staying power to prompt Peter to address the same issue in detail a generation later, 10, 15 years. Our present context in this particular study I'm reading here. Gnosticism paraded as a means for helping God through combat with unseen evil forces, and said combat frequently involved illegal, illicit sexual behavior, which of course required the participant to turn Scripture on its head. Herein we see all three satanic lies in full display. turning away from the truth to a substitute, alternative truth, then indulging oneself with no thought of God's authority, then finally justifying oneself by replacing God in one's heart with another God who needs help in fighting this fight against Satan. The three lies, just so we're clear, and I've addressed this before. You don't necessarily need to know these things, although I would advise that you learn them. I don't need God, first lie. I am like God, second lie. God needs my help. I am better than God, in other words. These are the three lies that when you follow satanic influence to its full extent, these are the three things that will absolutely take you over, harden your heart, and make you into an enemy of God. Absolutely. Revelation even calls the enigmatic, shadowy, and constantly shifting principles upon which this movement was based the deep things of Satan from Revelation 2:24, because they are actually the devil's lies, not in any way hostile to him in fact, right? Secret knowledge has always been appealing to the naive. Otherwise, there would be no explanation for Scientology or Eve's fascination with the idea of becoming like God or gods through the eating of the tree of knowledge. And it is easy to claim such knowledge, especially if it is only grudgingly given out at a high price. They act stingy with it so as to make it seem like it's valuable what they have to say. The fact of such stinginess and demand for great compensation, pay for what they're saying, in order to be enlightened, has historically always seemed to have piqued the interest of many victims. People, for whatever reason, see something that's worth money, whether it's worthless or not, and they automatically assume that because it has value, that this will be the cool thing to be doing, and it's worth their time. In essence, Gnosticism promised the thrill of spiritual combat with the forces of the devil, while in fact actually serving Satan. It posited, or it imputed, cosmic powers called eons, which are essentially demons, which could be neutralized through various means, thus prompting its new acolytes or followers to open themselves up to demon influence and even possession in the case of unbelievers. Taking part in various sorts of odd, arcane, and often also scurrilous behavior, sinful behavior, was one of the primary means of contacting, engaging with, and ostensibly, on the surface anyway, subduing these evil entities, these eons or angels. Gnosticism thus had all the advantages of legitimizing all manner of sinful activities committed by pagans in the course of their religious ceremonies, but now in the good cause of helping God. In short, it is not difficult to see the appeal of this movement, which had something for everyone. It revealed mystic secret knowledge, opened up the unseen world of angels and angelic combat, and turned gross sin into a holy pursuit. When wrapped in a cloak of biblical, quote, teaching, proffered or handed out by distinguished persons, distinguished seeming persons, let's be honest, it is no doubt a testimony to those early generations of the church age believers that more did not fall under their spell. Revelation 2:6. But you do have this in your favor, the fact that you hate the works of the Nicolaitans, Gnostic and other false teachers, in other words, which he also hates. All of the above is more merely historical or loosely applicable to us today. During the tribulation, Satan and his Antichrist will launch the ultimate religion, which will differ from Gnosticism only in its greatly expanded and all-inclusive nature. Gnosticism originally was very exclusive. You had to be part of the special group. Satan is going to take that same idea and spread it worldwide. That's the only main difference. That religion being, on the one hand, equally seductive in its clever appeal to all manner of secret desires, will also add the pressure of being compulsory. It'll be legally required on the other. Faced with the prospect of absolute ostracism, being shunned from society, in other words, even from buying and selling and possibly martyrdom for refusing to join by taking the mark of the beast, many will find the inclusivity of the beast pseudo-church appealing, especially since it will be coupled with all manner of alluring, quote, benefits in the manner of Gnosticism, albeit taking these excesses to never before seen levels. We see the early stages of this development today, of course. Believers who recognize the present dangers should keep in mind that they are mild compared to what will soon be unleashed, and do their best to start preparing spiritually here and now so as to be able to meet the challenge when it comes. The fact of the matter is the idea of secret knowledge, special information that's separate from the Bible, that one must hold on to so as to be a part of whatever this group, quote, to be saved, whether Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodox, as they call it. It could be any of the major cults, the Mormons, the JWs, Scientology. Um, Pick a name, add it in there. Every single one of them use the word Jesus Christ, the words Jesus Christ. They suppose that he is somehow involved in their illicit dealings and behavior. But when you really do any type of just mild look under the surface, just lift the hood a little bit, you'll find quite clearly that every single one of these cults hold doctrines, teachings, mysteries, if you will, that are exceedingly anti-biblical. I would even go so far as to say that the idea of secret special knowledge being only available to the certain initiates, it reminds me very much of dealing with the once saved, always saved and pre-trib crowd. When it comes down to it, when they're shown all the verses that very much suggest that what they believe is actually nonsense, I have literally had folks tell me, well, you just have to believe it because if you don't believe it, you don't receive that benefit. So if you don't believe in the pre-trib rapture, you won't be part of it. And if you don't believe in once saved, always saved, that means that you're one of the few that could break the rules they say don't even exist, that we could fall away by choosing to abandon Christ. Unfortunately, those two lies specifically, still technically allow the person who believes them to be a believer for now. That's the whole reason why they've been introduced. It's the reason why they're so attractive, because they're comfortable and they promise a life of no suffering. And indirectly, right? Because nobody's saying once saved, always saved means you can sin. But if you think about it, if somebody believes that they could never sin enough to even ever tempt themselves to fall away from Christ, they're going to be very full of the temerity to do basically whatever they want, just so long as they keep holding on to Christ, paying absolutely no mind to the fact that we as sinners can easily fall in love with that way of life again and eventually leave Him. And these these tendencies, these trends, are not slowing down. They're in fact they're all piling up to lead us into this situation where Satan, the original disperser, if you will, of all of these lies and nonsense, is going to mix it all up into the most potent possible brew. So much so that, again, as we've talked about many times before, even the elect will be tempted to believe and follow this nonsense. I'm going to make more videos on this subject. I'm going to be more specific in its application, but I wanted to give you guys a decent historical overview as to what we're actually dealing with when the word or term Gnosticism is brought up, and how even though no Christian would say that, special knowledge or gnosis is what led them to once saved, always saved or pre-trib rapture, the same ideas behind that trend's initial rise in popularity is very much behind any and all false teaching that exists in the world today, and it's all specifically for Satan's benefit. If you follow the logic end of where once saved, always saved would lead, eventually one day you're going to have to stare that mark in the face and actually tell yourself the lie that if you take it, you'll still be saved. Pre-trib rapturists, of course, they're going to wake up during the pre-trib, or during the trib, excuse me, and realize that their fever dream is 100% false. And for those who want to stay faithful, hopefully they will learn the word. But to be able to learn or practice, let's say, the game while at the game, having not done your due diligence before the game actually started, it means you will be woefully unprepared. At the very least, you will play very terribly. In this case, your chances of staying in faith and remaining in the Lord drop drastically over time. So these are the things that we try to avoid here. These are the warnings that this particular ministry tries to give, because the situation is going to be handed to us and we're not avoiding it. So the best thing to do is get to know all of its ins and outs, including the ideas surrounding Gnosticism, because they're all, again, very much, they're on that top 10 list of Satan's most popular and beneficial activities, at least as far as his evil plans are concerned. And Gnosticism is right up there. 1, 2, maybe 3 at most. But it's a very, very powerful mix, and it very much is designed to allure people away from the Lord, and specifically back into their sin, for comfort, fun, enjoyment, and not for faith. It takes us out of the mindset that because we are part of the Lord's body, we need to suffer to get to Him. And that's not right. Let me know what you guys think. This is a longer video than I intended, but this is a very important topic. So, yeah, I'm praying for you all. Keep growing, keep learning, keep coming into your ministry, keep helping others be built up in the faith. And we will talk to you again very soon, guys.